Boom! With the sound like a loud crack of a whip, Calvin heard the thunder reverberating through his ears. This was an unusual rainstorm to happen in the summertime in California, but it reminded him of the famous storms he endured while growing up in North Texas, near the city of Dallas. The storms often would come down trudging like angered gods, trying to wash the sins of the world away. This would put Calvin in an unsettled state where only his father could calm him down. His dad would calmly hold him and look at the window to reassure it was just nature and try to focus on the beauty that it could create. He would tell his son of stories of how the storms would soon turn into a beautiful rainbow and help all the thirsty plants and trees that have gone off to die. With another strike of thunder, Calvin was brought back to the present. He felt a gentle yet firm grasp around his leg. It was his son, now 4 years of age, clinging on to his dad as the full circle moment came, and it was now time for Calvin to console and calm his son down during these storms. He swiftly picked up his child and remembered what his father used to do to calm him down while the weather was having a huge hissy fit. In this moment, Calvin felt complete as he knew his purpose in life was to protect his son with all his might and resources. That is why when Calvin and his wife found out they were to have a child, he was over the moon with joy and elation. Finally, he felt that his life can begin with this gift that came into his life and that he now has to protect. His son, Antonio, was nothing but a delight and blessing to his father and mother as he went through his stages of infancy. Antonio was known to be a bit of a curious soul and often got into minor instances of trouble or rather misunderstandings. As Antonio got older, his father grew more in love with his son, while his mother grew more into depression. No one quite knows or understands how the bouts of depression as well as manic came about to be, but his mother refused to seek help as she thought this would show weakness to the world. During storms, Antonio's mother often would get unsettled and upset as she blamed this weather on her husband, moving the family to California, away from her home state of Wisconsin, where it rained, but she claimed never came down in such a way of anger, or rather causing her to feel so much anger. When she would see her son bonding with her husband, Calvin, she would become infuriated, thinking that he was trying to turn the child against her. She seethed and brooded at the way Calvin would calm Antonio down, the way Antonio held on with firm and assurance to his father, and the way it made her feel jealous that she was not the parent who the child came to first for anything. The next storm came a couple of weeks later, and this time the mother, Lauren, had had enough of the weather and the bonding it created with her husband and son. She left the house in hatred and fled to a friend's house, Danny, to calm down. These visits to her friend's house started to become more frequent, with their son Antonio being left as an afterthought. She began to pour all her focus into her new relationship with Danny behind the family's back to try and fill some wholeness her husband did with their son. She felt that if her son was going to make her feel bad and alone, then she would try and make him feel what she had in her heart, fear and hate. Over the course of a few more visits, the mother concocted a plan to rid the father of her life, as she viewed Calvin as the problems to her sadness and lonely lifestyle. Danny and Lauren ran through many plans, with most being crossed off as soon as they thought because the risk of getting caught was too high. One day, when Lauren was feeling particularly lonely and spiteful after she saw her son write on his homework that his father was his hero and who he felt comfort and love with, this brought Lauren to the edge where she now was willing to use her son to harm her husband, Calvin. With a deep breath, Danny laid out a plan that seemed foolproof. They would use a recording of her son Antonio crying for help to lure Calvin into the pool and make it look like a drowning. Not that well thought out, but nevertheless, it was the plan they were going with. While Calvin was away on a work trip, Lauren and Danny asked Antonio if he wanted to go out for a swim. They wanted to get a recording that sounded real enough and convincing to Calvin that he would, without hesitation, jump into the pool and they would finish the process of the accidental drowning. As they all put on their swimsuits and got ready to go out to the pool, Lauren did not even think twice about the danger or mental scars she could give in her son. When they walked out to the pool, the phone was already recording for audio. They then opened the gate, and that's when Lauren threw the child in the pool with no life vest or floats. You could hear the innocent child start to yell and get scared, yet the only concern Lauren had was if the neighbors heard and found out. The panic of trying to cover this up allowed her mind to forget that her son actually needed to be saved. Danny did not particularly care about the child struggling, as he was nothing more than being used to finish out Lauren's plan to rid her of her husband. Coming back to her senses, she looked at Danny and saw he dropped his phone, where he was recording audio, and looked confused. She turned back to look at her son in the pool and realized that her worrying thoughts of being caught had given enough time to let her son drown. Her first thought was this is the worst case possible, not because her son is dead, but rather her husband is still alive and this was all for nothing. She began to blame her husband for the death of her son before Calvin even heard the news. Once Calvin found out about Antonio, he immediately got on the first flight to come home. However, when he came home, he arrived to a house full of cops with his wife nowhere in sight. A couple minutes later, he found out Lauren gave her statement about the incident and left with her friend to grieve over the situation. Mourning the loss of his son, Calvin became empty and had questions of how this could happen. Still unsure of the details, Lauren abruptly left Calvin for good to be with Danny and forget the pain she blamed him for. Months went by, years went by, and Calvin, still yearning to be a loving father, missed his son every day. It became increasingly hard for him to bear life without his son and soon closed off his heart as to not be hurt again. He continued to live in the same house as it was the only memories he could retain and make him smile the times he had with Antonio. Lauren went off to live her life, but never without a partner, and continuing to play the poor mother who lost her son. Several years later, she settled down with another man, Corey. Never once feeling guilt over the killing of her son, she soon became pregnant with her and Corey's daughter, Katana. However, from the start, her daughter did nothing but remind her of Calvin and Antonio. The way Katana laughed, smiled, giggled, wrinkled her nose, it all looked the way Antonio did. The days came and went, and more Katana started to embody what her half brother was like when he was alive. On a beautiful spring day during the fifth anniversary of Antonio's death, Calvin held a small gathering at the cemetery to remember the life of his son. Not to look like a cold hearted mother and still playing the grieving parent, Lauren attended the ceremony with Katana and Corey, her new family. While there, she noticed her daughter kept gravitating towards Calvin and away from her and Corey. With every instance Katana acknowledged or laughed at or with Calvin, Lauren's hate grew like a weed in a cornfield. Nearing the end of the ceremony at the cemetery, Katana had made her way into the arms of Calvin, where this was the first time he felt so close to another child like his son. Many who had not seen Calvin for a while or heard from him started to assume and ask if this was his daughter. This was the final straw for Lauren. She pushed Corey to the side as if it was his fault and stomped over to retrieve her daughter from the arms of Calvin, where they were both happy and calm. With the look of the devil showing through her eyes, she grabbed her daughter, leaving marks, and ripped her from Calvin. All eyes were on her in this moment. Katana started to cough. The cough got worse and louder, and all the eyes started to feel like laser beams of judgment. Trying to appear like a good mother she wanted to be seen as, she hit her daughter on the upper back to clear her throat and stop the coughing. Katana started throwing up water that smelled like chlorine. Everyone in close proximity noticed that the smell started to grow stronger, like the smell of the chemicals in an indoor pool. Never have putting a full sentence together, Katana abruptly asked, "Mother, why did you drown me?" Mortified, Lauren quickly kept hitting the child's back to cover up what she could not believe was happening. Unsure if others heard what Katana just said, she ran off to her car without Corey. Beep, you could hear her frantically unlocking the car to get in and leave instantly. But when she opened the door, water poured out, as if someone opened a fire hydrant. This brought all attention from everyone who was in a 100-foot vicinity. In the moment of being unsettled, she dropped her daughter on the ground. Katana started to walk towards the water, being unaffected by the heavy streams. She calmly crawled into the car and reached her arm out. Calvin could not believe what he saw. Katana was pulling Antonio out of the car and appearing to save him from drowning. Everyone quickly rushed to see if this was a miracle or if someone spiked the drinks with drugs and everyone was hallucinating. Calvin and Lauren rushed to the children, who are now holding hands side by side. They both kept repeating in unison, "Mother, why did you drown me?" Lauren became pale as a ghost as the audio of the initial recording suddenly was put on speaker through her car. Everyone could hear her and Danny's voice, years earlier, speaking to each other about manipulating the child into appearing to drown to trick Calvin into their plan. Knowing she had been caught and exposed, she tried to explain her way out of what her children have been iterating. Once she opened her mouth, she started to choke on water and slowly asphyxiated down onto her knees. As her eyes slowly began to shut, she could hear her children still hand in hand, continually asking her mother, or continuing to ask, "Mother, why did you drown me?"